All right, everybody, welcome to Bonehead. We have one of our special guests tonight, Mark A. Altman. I don't know, what do you like to be called? Producer, writer, extraordinaire, all the above?
Depends, sometimes director, sometimes producer, sometimes author. Author sounds the most prestigious, but usually showrunner is good. Just Mark, that's my favorite probably of all of them.
I just like it when someone just doesn't say "Hey, fatty" to me. So there you go. We were so excited when James said that you would do the show because we're fans, and we always try to think of a first question that not everybody would ask. So, for example, you never ask Mark Hamill about Star Wars. That should never be your first question. We've moderated a lot of conventions, several big conventions. Try never to ask, and the audience will ask that. Make sense?
But, so did you ask Mark the most important question?
What?
Real quick. Conan the Barbarian or the Beastmaster? Go.
Because the Crusher enemies to see them bow down before them and hear the lamentation of the Femin.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Although, I gotta say Don Coscarelli was really nice to me once, so I gotta go with the Beastmaster every once in a while. Just because I know Don.
And Mark Singer's abs.
That's true. And Don's like 8 foot tall. Okay.
I love Don, but I have to go with Conan, which is the great.
I agree.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But so normally we try not to ask questions, but I always want to ask, like, who's the biggest asshole? You have worked with two people, and you don't have to tell this story, but I'm going to start it out with, you've worked with two people who are infamous for how they've worked with other people, right? One of them being a guy that was on the original Star Trek, and the other one being an infamous German director.
Ah, that's not where I thought you were going with that. Okay.
No, and he actually kind of laid into us at one point.
On Twitter. We loved it. We weren't trying to start a fight. We actually were trying to be nice and would have loved for him to come on the show. We had no ill will whatsoever.
You were going to ask about Sharon, but okay. You went with Uwe instead. Okay, so
yes. Let me ask you a question. I don't need to. Out of the two.
Yes.
How should I ask this, gentleman? Not who's the biggest asshole. I don't want you to go with that. I'm not looking for Twitter bait or anything like that. We don't even do that show.
Just you have a interesting
because
story.
Shatner, actually, I'm the only one out of us Shatner was wonderful to. I don't have anything bad to say about Shatner. So do you have what's your best story out of those two?
Well, actually, the fact that you preface this whole question by saying, I want to ask you something you normally don't get asked.
I know you get asked it all the time, but I couldn't stop. Sorry.
Oh, no. I would say how much respect I have for you for saying that, because my whole career is predicated on that. As a journalist, I always believed in not asking the obvious question. It goes back to when I was 8 years old, standing in line at the mall for Leonard Nimoy's autograph. And I'm not going to ask him about Star Trek.
Nope.
Everyone asks him about Star Trek.
Yep.
I'm going to ask him about In Search Of. And in my mind,
fantastic show.
Super cool, because I was the only guy who asked him about In Search Of and not Star Trek. And even, when we were begging Shatner to do our movie Free Enterprise, and we, sort of sent our missive with the offer, we talked about how great he was in Saturday Night Live and how great he was on Fridays and his great comic ability. We never mentioned Star Trek once. So I love the fact that you said, I'm going to ask you a question, which isn't the obvious question, because I think there's a way, at least I found it as a journalist, when I was a journalist, it's a way you endear yourself to your interview subject. If you ask them because they want to talk about anything but the obvious.
Anything.
If you start to talk to somebody, say they like fly fishing, and they're famous for Firefly or something, you start talking about fly fishing, you're immediately going to endear yourself and warm them up to you, as opposed to, tell me what it was like working with Joss Whedon. So I think That's great. Now, to answer your question.
So I'm going to spin that and take that as a compliment towards me for asking the Beastmaster question. So thank you, sir.
True. That's true. Because I did ask about two people you get asked about, but I could not go past. And really quick, I did the same thing with Romero a few years ago. I was like, I'm not asking you anything about zombies before we did his panel. He goes, really? And I go, nope, not one. The audience will ask.
About Des Moines. So forget Pittsburgh. All about Des Moines. So, but
So go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
Do 6 degrees here. So you mentioned the Beastmaster. When I was doing the James Bond book, Nobody Does It Better, one of my absolute favorite interviews was Tanya Roberts, which is amazing. She said to me, this is the best interview I've ever had. Now, I don't know if she says that to everybody, and I prefer she said other things, but the fact that it was the best interview that she ever had was sweet. And I have to tell you, I'm not a fan of View to Kill. I'm not a fan of Stacey Sutton in that movie at all. James, hey! But she was so great to interview, and I had a whole new respect for her by the time that interview was over. So, and we talked about the Beastmaster, which was super fun. And
I love the way you said it at the end.
Yeah.
It's like a fascinating movie. Can you tell me about the fucking ferrets again? Sorry.
Hey, poor Kodo got thrown into a fire.
No.
She got a View to a Kill was because of Beastmaster, because she did a Playboy layout for Beastmaster, and he saw the Playboy layout, and then he said, let's hire her to a kill. I don't even think they had her read for it. I don't know, but they literally cast her out of that Playboy pictorial, because that's how they used to do it, because a lot of the Bond girls, they look great, but they couldn't act, but they would just dub them. All the early Bond girls, Ursula Andress
right.
They said, oh, can she act? Who cares? We'll just dub her. And Danielle Bianchi was dubbed, Claudine Auger and in Thunderbolt, she was dubbed. So anyway, I don't know why I went off on that tangent, because
it was awesome.
The question you guys want to know is who the pricks are that I've worked with.
No. I just wanted, there's just, I've Matthew Lillard. I've got to ask this question. I could just go down a litany of people that I've because we've never met him, even though he attacked us on Twitter, and that's another story.
We have a lot, and we have a lot of personal memories of watching Uwe Boll films. For example, I was in Joe's apartment when we watched Postal, and I got traumatized by Dave Foley's Wang. So
And honestly, there's scenes in it that I enjoy. There's scenes that I like in Outhouse of the Dead. But anyway, back to what we were saying.
Did you say Outhouse of the Dead?
Outhouse of the Dead. I didn't mean to. I meant in House of the Dead.
All that Outhouse of the Dead, but. It's interesting because you mentioned Matthew Lillard. For my first film, Free Enterprise, originally it was going to be Christian Slater and Samantha Mathis. And Christian Slater went to jail. And our second choice was Matt Lillard. And he was actually represented by an agent that we knew really well. And he passed and ended up being, Ray for Weigel. But Matthew Lillard was like our second choice for Rob in Free Enterprise.
Wow. Oh, really?
So
you did not bring that up.
You just mentioned something. I'm like, back in the day. So let's talk about I'll tell you, look, I'll dispense with the Bill thing first, because I understand his reputation. However, I had an amazing experience with him. It was great. We approached him with respect. We approached him like the Godfather. He was excited when he did commit to do the movie. He was excited to be there. I think he sensed the fact that we respected him. The thing about Bill is he doesn't suffer fools gladly. So I think if you treat him like, hey, I paid you to be at this convention and just do what we say, or I paid you a lot of money to be in this movie, just do what we say, he feels like, I have decades and decades of experience, and if you're not going to take advantage of that, F you pay me, like Goodfellas. But, we had nothing but a great experience. And I continue to be friends with Bill to this day, and I'm so grateful, because who gets to make a movie with their childhood idol, their first movie,
Right. And
to me, he just lived up to everything, I hoped he would be. And, I hear from people who say, oh, he was mean to me at a convention. At the same time, he does how many of these a week, every weekend? And then how much dumb questions can you be? I mean, it goes back to what you said at the beginning. For 50 years, he's been asked the same stupid questions about Star Trek. Yep. I understand why he would lose his temper,
Oddly enough, most of our stories come from industry people. But yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
People, but who haven't had it. But I feel like we went to him with respect, and we wanted him for the right reasons. And, you know, we really were sort of the first people to sort of tap into his comic abilities, because this was before the big giant head in 30 Rock, and it was before, you know, it was funny because when we were making the movie, Priceline contacted us and they wanted to see dailies because they heard there's this scene where he's singing in a club, or he's in a club, and they were coming up with their first Priceline campaign, and we sent it to them. They're very appreciative. And, you know, now obviously we know what happened. And I say, look, I didn't even get free plane tickets out of that. I got nothing from them. I don't know why I was so happy to help them, because, you know, I didn't get stock options, you know, and we basically gave them a great advertising campaign. So, but live and learn. And so, yeah, my thoughts about Bill were great. And it's similar, and I'll get to Uwe, but I thought you were going to say Sharon Stone, because of course I work with Sharon on Agent X, and it was a similar thing. You know, Sharon, it got to the point where the only person she wanted writing for us, because, you know, she's a famous diva, for writing for it, was us. And we love Sharon. And it was also because I knew her career inside and out. So we talked about Verhoeven one day, you know, and we talked, you know, Sliver another day. And we talked about, I talked about Stardust Memories and working with Woody Allen. You know, it was like, so it was great. And we had a lot of fun with her. And, you know, it was really like old Hollywood, because she's like a throwback to these classic, you know, Hollywood blondes. And so that was great. And that was a really disappointing experience in the sense that Agent X was a show that we really loved working on, and it was sort of finding its legs, and then, you know, got canceled, which we knew was going to happen. But because TNT was making big changes at the time, they were going away from sort of the fun, entertaining shows to like the really dark Emmy bait that nobody watched. You know, but working with Sharon was great. So Uwe is an interesting case, because Uwe, you know, his reputation where he's very pugilistic, and he's very confrontational, you guys know. But in person, he's a really nice guy. Like, personally, I had a good experience with him. The story of House of the Dead was tough, because we had optioned the rights to the game. We were about to lose the rights because the option was up, and it was an expensive option. And somebody, our business affairs guy, said, you know, I was introduced to this guy who has a German tax fund who could finance the movie. And I said, well, it's great. Let's do it. He goes, well, there's a caveat. I said, what's the caveat? He has to direct. And it's like, and we all looked at each other and were like, well, I don't know. And it's like, well, we're going to lose the rights anyway. So it's better to just go ahead with this, and we can control him, hopefully, and, you know, work with him, and we'll make it a good movie. Well, about a week or two into the movie, I knew there was no controlling this force of nature. And, you know, literally Jürgen Prochnow will run up to him and say, I signed up to make the script, but we're not making the script, because he was telling everybody to ad lib and say whatever they wanted and just do whatever they wanted. And he arbitrarily ripped 20 pages out of the script to save money, because raised the money he hoped. So like the scenes were being thrown out willy-nilly. And, you know, and like everybody was just like, you know, felt the pain of the death of 1,000 cuts. And I'll never forget when he did the rough cut, when it was cut together, I did a 40-page memo with notes, 40 pages of notes.
Wow.
Not did he do. And I was just like, you know, it was what it was. And it was, you know, it was a fun experience in Vancouver. I liked the cast. You know, there was a point where I was up there and I just realized there's no controlling this guy. And I'm like, I'm just going to get out of Dodge and go to the next movie, because this is, you know, going to be what it is. It's going to be a train wreck. And it was so funny, because like we go on the weekends, we go out to dinner, we have a great time. We go see something like, it was a fellowship. I remember this very vividly. Fellowship of the Ring, right? And we'd come into onto stage on Monday, and there'd be a whole new scene added to the script. And we're like, what is? And he's like, the zombies could be hiding in this ditch, and the zombies will come up to him, and they'll look around, and they'll smell, and they'll walk. And it was literally the same scene as in Fellowship. Like, the same thing, because we do bullet time with zombies, because he'd seen The Matrix the week before. I mean, it was hysterical. And I told some of these stories on the commentary for House of the Dead. One of my proudest moments, you know, a lot of people coming up to me at Comic-Con and stuff who recognize, oh, you're Mark Altman, blah, blah. Very nice, very flattering. Free Enterprise changed my life. So one time I had one of these people come up, and I thought, oh, okay, it's going to be a Free Enterprise story, which I'm very appreciative of, or whatever. And he goes, I just want to tell you, your audio commentary on the House of the Dead DVD is the greatest audio commentary of all time. And I was like, wow, okay, well, thank you.
Very specific.
Yeah, and I loved it because I was fairly candid because I don't dislike Uwe. He's impossible to dislike. He is such an interesting guy. Now he's apparently a very successful restaurateur in Canada.
Right.
But we sort of gave him. I feel guilty because we gave him this whole model of optioning video games and making video game movies, and then he took it and ran with it and ran it into the ground. Making progressively worse and worse movies. And it was just because he just wanted to go fast, and also it was his fund. So he's always trying to cut corners on money to try and save money because, he's a doctor of finance. Mm-hmm. He's a very bright guy.
Right.
And but it was a bad situation because he couldn't tell himself, no, this is worth spending money on. I mean, I remember there was this great location really early on, and we found it, we scouted it and stuff. Like, let's cut that scene. Why? Because the location's too expensive and we don't need it. But we did need it. It set up the whole movie. I mean, and then, it was like, let's cast. We did all this casting down the U.S. We found these great actors, spent weeks and weeks casting. And it's like, okay, so who do this we have it narrowed down to. He goes, no, we cast everyone in Canada. I don't want to spend SAG. We forget them. No. And I saw this guy. I met him at a bar. He's great. He'll be great. And and it was just like, I mean, it was so funny because I remember the crew shirt when we wrapped. They give you a crew gift. Well, this was a T-shirt, and on it was just quotes from Uwe on the back of the T-shirt, and it was so funny. This is not the Fulton's family porch. Let's shoot. And he's like. Zombies at the fort, they had killed them, and it was crazy. I mean, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. I mean, the movie's an embarrassment, but look, if you're drunk enough and it's late enough on a Saturday night, it could be entertaining. But
I still love the trailer with who is it? Up in here, the original as it cuts to slow motion with a bullet time. I could watch that trailer a dozen times. It is so much fun to me. And don't get me wrong, I love great cinema. In fact, you writing 40 pages reminds me of Orson Welles, of the cut that they did of, my mind just went blank. It wasn't Ambersons, it's the other one.
Garbage Pail Kids, the movie.
Not Garbage Pail Kids, the movie. No, that's another Orson Welles. Anyway, it reminds me of that. Touch of Evil. Touch of Evil. Why couldn't I think of Touch of Evil? My mind went blank. But it reminds me of that. But still, I'm sitting here going, I just love the trailer. And oddly enough, Matthew Lillard said the same thing about him. He said if you knew him in person, he was just a mensch. He just loved.
Really was.
Nicest guy. And by the way, we interviewed Chris Alexander. Do you know him? He used to be the editor for Fango after Tony Timpone. He's one of the guys that boxed him.
Oh, God.
You remember that?
Of course. Who could forget?
Well, Chris Alexander said even after remember? Even Chris said, he was really nice to me. He took me to dinner after the boxing. We had a good time.
So impressed at it. I mean, I look at Uwe as the modern day William Castle.
With less talent?
Weren't great. But he knew how to promote himself. Mm-hmm. And, he ultimately, was smart enough to produce Rosemary's Baby. And I've always said that if Uwe had taken that money and gambled on young filmmakers with great ideas and a vision, he could have made a lot of money in the movie business. Yeah. But he didn't. Instead, he kept, as he started making less and less money, he started making these movies cheaper and cheaper, and they just got, progressively worse. I mean, I know Postal, for instance, he was very proud of. I mean, I went to a screening in town. It's like, oh, you're gonna love this. This is my masterpiece.
But it may actually be his best movie.
Some people feel that way.
I will say that when they interview him in that movie,
I laughed quite a bit.
When they interview him in that movie,
when
they interview him in that movie, and he goes on that whole tirade, I think that's comedy genius in the middle of that movie. So,
yeah,
again, it's like I can't. He had this entourage of really lovely German people, and I remember very early on, I was sitting at dinner, and I was surrounded by Uwe and like 6 or 7 of his German friends, and I said, now I know what the Poles felt like in 38.
That's a great one. Well, his joke in Postal is like, my grandfather died at Auschwitz, so did mine. He fell from a guard tower.
Yeah.
I mean, it's bad taste, but it's genius. It's great comedy.
It's not genius. It's
I really thought it was funny. I know. Here I am defending him. But it doesn't matter. Thank you so much for that. That was my question I wanted to ask, and I know it's kind of cliche, but thank you.
Oh, it's fine. I'm happy to defend Uwe because there's so many people that and he's his
I
own.
don't know that I want to defend him. His movies are bad.
I'm not defending him as a human being, and I will tell you that he didn't do himself any favors with that Vanity Fair piece where he's so defensive. And I'm really glad that he's doing well, and I understand he's kids now, and I haven't seen him in a long time, but I know a lot of people who know him, and I'm happy for him. I have no ill will towards him whatsoever, and he's a good guy, and I think he's found his calling, and in the restaurant business.
I'm sorry. All right, James, you had a question ready to go.
Well, as I said when I contacted you, Free Enterprise, I am also one of those people that Free Enterprise, I loved it the first time I saw it. I have the soundtrack.
Here he goes, kissing your ass.
Well, no, it's a phenomenal soundtrack. I've introduced more people to it. Matter of fact, a friend of mine every year now posts No Tears for Caesar by Shatner, which I believe you wrote.
Bill Shakespeare and Bill Shatner. It was quite a collection of authors.
Well, but I also wanted to ask you about, as you've got your Bond background, you also have been with Edward Gross doing these oral histories. You did the one for the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, the 2-volume set, I believe. And now Nobody Does It Better, I think came out in February, which is the oral history of the James Bond films. I love oral history. So can you talk a little bit about how those came together and why you think it's important to do them as oral histories instead of some other way?
That's a good question. I mean, I've been a journalist for a long time, and then when I started doing movies and TV, I wasn't really doing that anymore. And it got close to the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, and Ed called me up, and he said, "Oh, it'd be great anniversary of Star Trek. I'd love to do, book, and are you interested?" And I'm like, "No, not really." And he said, "Why not?" And he was like, really, anxious to do something, and he needed me to do it with him, and I'm just like, I'm not really interested. But I had just read this MTV, I Want My MTV, which is this great oral history about the history of MTV. And as I was about to hang up, I made the mistake of saying, maybe if we did it as an oral history, it could be interesting. And I said, but I'm not saying I'm going to do it. I said, look, talk to our agent, see if she thinks there's something, see if she can make a deal that's worthwhile. Otherwise, I'm not interested. You should go do it yourself. He said, I can't do it myself. I need you, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, he talks to our agent, and sure enough, she sells the book like the next day. And I'm like stuck doing this book. But the good thing was we had the greatest time. It was phenomenal. I'm so proud of that book. And it was so huge by the time the manuscript was done. We called up our editor and we said, look, it's too big to be one book. You're going to have to split it up and make it 2 books because otherwise we'll have to cut it to ribbons and it's not right. And he said, well, I'll be the judge of that. He was very thought, who are these guys that tell me it should be 2 books? So he reads the book, and then the next day we get an email that says it's 2 books. So that was great. And they came out, and they were hugely successful, which was really, it was the first time we had like a best-selling book, and I was really gratified. And I said, okay, I'm done. And then he said, well, come on, they're asking us to do another book. Let's do another book. So we ended up making a deal to do the Buffy and Galactica books. And so, I said, okay. So we did those. They turned out really well. And I said, but I'm done. I'm done. I said, well, you really want another book? I said, there's nothing I'm interested in writing. We did Galactica, that was great, but I'm done now. We're done. And I said, there's nothing I would want to write about other than, I guess, James Bond. So let's do a James Bond book. And I'm like, oh man. I'm like, well, if we can make a deal and it makes sense, and and sure enough, we sold it, and I think it's our best book, even better than 50-Year Mission. Came in February. I think the paperback comes out in October, and I'm just thrilled with it. We had so much fun, and it was a chance to talk to so many people I would have never talked to otherwise, and ask them questions they're not used to being asked. And it was great, and I love that. I love that book because we tried. There's so many great books about the James Bond movies, so we tried to make it something different, a combination of a making of, but also a podcast, also like people's opinions about the movies, because we all have opinions, and most of them are completely conflict, about the Bond movies. Like I'll say, View to a Kill is probably one of the worst Bond movies ever made. I know people who think it's the best, God help them. So anyway, it was really great, and we had a great time doing the Bond book together. And I enjoy working with Ed. Ed called me up when he used to write for Starlog back when I was, I think, in college writing for Cinefantastic. And he said, oh, I wanted to find out if I could use some of your material for something. And we've been friends ever since. So it's always nice to be working with Ed. And we keep trying to one up each other with our interviews. So it's always been a great experience.
Let me ask you a question about that, just to follow up off the top of my head. Can you talk a little bit about the logistics of that, the actual logistics of getting all those people and interviewing them, how you do that? And now I would imagine it's a little easier than it was 10, even maybe 5 years ago because of Zoom and some other things over the phone. Can you talk a little bit about that? Finding them, getting up with them. Hey, no, this person, they may not know who you are.
Well, the Star Trek book's a little different because the Star Trek book, both Ed and I had covered Star Trek so extensively over the years. So a lot of people who had died, like particularly with the original series, he had already interviewed over the years, and then I had covered Next Generation really extensively. But we still had a ton of people we needed to talk to. And Ed operates differently. He's in New York, so he likes to do phone interviews. And whereas I really prefer to do them in person.
Yeah, me too.
I can get a lot more them to open up much more. They also can say, oh, I'm getting another call, I got to go. So I can push to get more out of them, or I can get them drunk and get more out of them. So I like to do it in person. But it gets expensive after a while. I said, I think I'm losing money on this book. I bought so many dinners and lunches and drinks. I said, I don't know if the advance is going to cover all this. So but in a lot of cases, I would just query them because we were the major publisher, so that helps. So I could say, we're doing an oral history of Star Trek for St. Martin's Press. And in other cases, it was a lot of friends of friends, because like for Enterprise, I decided I wanted to do the Enterprise chapter because it was the show I had written nothing about. But most of those people were connected to somebody either I knew, like that's how I was able to get Fred Decker. And like Fred was a huge fan of Free Enterprise. Like that was also helpful because a lot of people knew Free Enterprise. So I was able to get it, or they were somebody who worked on a TV show that I worked on or whatever. So that helped a lot. But other times it's just querying, but because it was St. Martin's and because it was, something, but then there were still people we didn't get. But for the most part, I was really happy. I mean, a lot of people we didn't think we'd get, like Kate Mulgrew, we ended up getting, and she was fantastic. I mean, she basically, copped to the whole feud with Jerry, which was fantastic, and I apologized for it. Amazing, which she didn't even do in her own biography. So it was really great. And it got to the point where, Ed would get somebody amazing like that we never thought we could get, like a Phil Kaufman to talk about Planet Titans. And then I would get somebody, and then he would get somebody. I would call and say, stop competing with me, Decker. It's like we kept trying to one up each other. And it was really fun because I said, oh, guess who I got today? And he's like, and I was like, and the next day he gets somebody really cool. So the whole experience of writing that book was phenomenal. And I mean, I remember at the last second, it wouldn't mean a lot to many people, but we were writing about the second season of Next Generation. What a clusterfuck that was. And there was one guy who had died. This guy, Burton Armus, who actually was the Armus that was named in Superman, where he goes, "Hey, Armus," and so he was a New York City cop, and nobody had ever interviewed him. And Ed says to me, he says, I think I interviewed him back in the day, but I never used it for anything. I never sold to Starlog. I don't even think I transcribed it. So he went down to his basement, which he calls the TARDIS. So whenever he felt TARDIS. And so he calls me later that day and says, "You'll never believe what I found." I said, "What?" He said, "It's a microcassette with my interview with Burton Armus that I never had." So like 30 years, we had this guy speaking from the dead. And it was like, for us, that was a huge, like, oh my God, we got Burton Armus. Never talked about Star Trek. We got this unpublished interview. We got him in the book years after he died. It was so awesome. And I mean, we basically consider ourselves the angels of death because when we're writing a book, it's like 2-year process. People just start dying. It's like we started writing the Star Trek book, like Hart Bennett, Leonard Nimoy, Bernie Williams. People just start dying. It's like, and we're like, we better get to these people before they die. It happened again with the James Bond book, Louis Gilbert, and all these people start dying when we start writing the book.
Jesus Christ, what have you done to us, James?
Yeah, it's like
I've had a good run. This is a good way to go.
You don't write a book about you, that's for sure.
Thank God we've never been interesting enough to talk about. Sorry.
Well, I think the and one thing I did want to say, and I want to be conscious of our time, but I think one of the things that I really appreciate about everything that you've done, because I'm a big fanboy, so I was thinking I haven't read the James Bond book yet, but it's on my to-do list because it's James Bond.
Yeah.
And we'll pip the hell out of it later.
You have such a great. It comes across that you're a fan. In Free Enterprise, one thing that I appreciate about it, because that opening scene where somebody is beat up for wearing a Star Trek uniform struck home.
Something about the Rob. I mean, people say how much is that show, is that movie based on your real lives? And I say it's like Seinfeld is based on his real. You know, the character's named Seinfeld. There's stuff drawn from his real life, but then it's enhanced for comedic effect. I mean, that's Free Enterprise. A lot of stuff was based on our real life at the time, but a lot of it is embellished for comedic effect. That was not. Rob really got beat up in college, in kindergarten or whatever it was, for wearing a Starfleet uniform, but he did not see William Shatner when he was knocked unconscious. So that was taking liberties. And of course, the story with young Mark where he goes to see Star Trek: The Motion Picture and the ticket taker won't let him in. And gets his mother's back. That was true. That was really something that happened to me.
Yeah, I think that's what I really appreciate is all of your work, the oral histories and everything. You have a great appreciation of what it means to be a fan, and I just wanted to say I really appreciate that, because it's been really easy at times to mock the fans. We've seen lots of movies do that and things like that. And I think it's funny. We interviewed, maybe it was Peter David last week, who mentioned that now Big Bang Theory has taken over and the geeks have inherited the earth.
Right, sure.
But you beat the punch to that, and I really appreciate that. So
it's actually really annoying when people say, "Oh, you guys in Big Bang Theory," because Big Bang Theory is a show that really sort of was the cliche, and we were really trying to deconstruct the cliche. And it's funny, Comic-Con, it was another one of those instances where it was at like the WB party or whatever, and I met a bunch of people from Big Bang Theory and said, "Oh, we're big fans of Free Enterprise," and I'm like, "Oh, I would have never, I actually would have never guessed that." And they're lovely people, and obviously, but I never watched the show, and I'm not saying, I know a lot of people love it. Ed Gross is like one of his favorite shows, but I just never felt like, I don't know those fans. Like, I don't know the weird OCD Asperger type fans. It's like, I get it, and I understand that. But that's not the kind of fan that me and my friends were growing up.
Go ahead.
We were functional. We were dysfunctional, but we weren't like, we weren't that, those people. We weren't that, what's Captain Kirk's safe number, because we love movies, we love television, and we loved, one of the things when Rob and I were doing a lot of publicity for the movie, and we were traveling the world, we said, this is what Star Trek's about. It's about boldly going. It's not about being in your parents' basement. It's about meeting new people, exploring new cultures. I mean, one of the greatest experiences we had, besides premiering the movie in Spain, was going to a convention in France and realizing Star Trek fans are the same the world over. But I'll never forget. It's like we were there and we were having the greatest time, and all we wanted to do was do like really cool French stuff, like go to the catacombs and go to these cool raves, and they say, "Oh, tomorrow's the big night. You have to be there for the big closing night party." And we said, "Oh, really? Where is it? Where is it?" They go, "Planet Hollywood." And we were both like, "Oh, it's like that's the last place you want to go in Paris." So it was, it was such an amazing experience, because the experience of making the movie was only part of it, because traveling the world and promoting it, it's like we went to the Cannes Film Festival with Shatner. I mean, Shatner went, and then we actually donated his wardrobe to Planet Hollywood Cannes. And, we had this huge press event, and that was where we had a big party one night for the, went to a big party that was a Free Enterprise / festival in Cannes, which was a movie Henry Jaglman made. And so Maximilian Schell is there. And Rob and I are freaking out because we're like, oh my God, it's Dr. Hans Reinhardt from the Black Hole. And Shatner's hugging him because they'd been in Judgment at Nuremberg together. And we're like, this is the greatest thing ever, Captain Kirk, Dr. Hans Reinhardt. But nobody would get that. Nobody. It was like, and we're just like, this is awesome. So, I mean, I'm so appreciative for having those experiences, those kind of fan experiences. It was a great way to start the second stage of my career, because my first was, as a journalist, but then, my professional career was like, I couldn't ask for more. It was this amazing adventure.
It's a fantastic story because Tarantino talks about that with Reservoir Dogs, was that Reservoir Dogs allowed him to see the world.
Yeah, and it was true because I'd never been out of the country until for Enterprise, and we were invited to have the world premiere in the Sitges Film Festival. And of course, then at some point we're at the Hawaii Film Festival in this treehouse. It was like something at an Endor or at a Jedi. And that's where I first met Quentin, because Quentin was telling us how much he loved the movie and was doing all, he knew he'd only seen the movie once and was doing all of Shatner's lines. You know, it's one man version of Julius Caesar. And to watch Quentin doing our movie was like this incredible thing. And then it was many years later that I ran into him again in Sitges, and I'll never forget, because we were all like having dinner at this really nice restaurant along the water, and all of a sudden Quentin goes running by like a Hard Day's Night or something. I'm like, he's being chased by paparazzi. He runs in and he's like, "Can I sit with you guys? I got to lose the press." I'm like, "Yeah, of course." So we're sitting there for like 3 or 4 hours, just like drinking and having a great time, and he's ordering all these bottles of Dom, and he's like, "Oh, can I hang out with you until your movie premieres?" It was actually House of the Dead too, and we said, "Well, you know, we're going to go back and change and get ready." He goes, "Okay," and he just runs off and leaves. You know, and then we had this huge bill for all this champagne and food, and I was like, you know, so it's like, oh, great, Stiff by Quentin Tarantino, but it was fine because we've been out on that story ever since.
I believe the bastard didn't pay before he went.
But you know, he's awesome. He's awesome.
So that leads me to a question I was sitting here thinking about, of the people. I mean, we are of a certain age, the four of us. What do you think it's going to be like? It's because it's so much more acceptable now. Star Trek is more acceptable. Star Wars is more acceptable. Of course, Star Wars is probably always more acceptable because it's it's a phenomenon. But what is it going to be? Because now it's everywhere.
Yes.
You can't escape it. Hollywood only makes 4 movies, and one of those is superhero, right? What is that like now for the people who are growing up? Because it's so much more accepted. It's not. It doesn't seem to have the same. I don't know, and I don't want to sound like a geek god or a comic book man. If like you just wouldn't get it, but I don't know that they'll understand.
No, I get what you're saying. It's like
how do you think people will feel about your movie Free Enterprise 20 years from now?
Well, I don't know if they get it now, because it was very much a part of a time, the 90s, and obviously we're very influenced by swingers, and I mean, there are jokes in there that I think are hysterical that, you know, people would be extremely offended by right now. You know, I mean, we would have walkouts, you know, because they would. I mean, the thing has changed so much. I mean, even the way that the guys, you know, deal with women and stuff and talk about women, it's like, I think that, you know, some people would deem that problematic, you know, but look, I think the movie holds up because I think that it is a great snapshot into geek culture at the time. And, you know, I'm really, really proud of it. I know that there's a version that's streaming, which is terrible, which is missing footage, and I don't know what the hell that is. But so people, you know, want to see it, they should get the special edition DVD. This is still not on a Blu-ray because of a rights issue, but you know, that's the way to watch it. You know, and it's just, but I don't know in 20 years, because you know. Geek culture has become so snarky and negative, and but it's not based on anything. Like, there's nothing wrong with not liking something if you can give it a legitimate critique. Like, I hate the prequels, but you know, I don't just shit on the prequels for no reason. I have my distinct reasons for that. But I feel like everything is so polarized. Like, either something is amazing or something's awful. But
I agree.
People find the good in it, and then there's a real problem with contemporary audiences being able to watch anything that's more than, you know, 2 years old, because like you try and show them Forbidden Planet or even like a Logan's Run or even stuff from the 80s, and they have a real tough time accepting it, you know, both because of the physical production limitations, but also, you know, content wise, they can't just gloss over something that maybe isn't as acceptable today as it was then and say, well, you know, it's a product of its era. No, it's something that needs to, you know, it's that whole cancel culture thing, which, you know, I'm super liberal, but the cancel culture thing is, you know, so offensive to me. And
there's and just say you're woke, and that glosses over everything. I'm woke, I'm not going to accept that. Well, you know, things have changed, things are different, and times aren't the same. I totally agree with you. And history, ignoring it is not going to fix your problems now.
No, it's like this whole thing was, oh, you can't show Gone with the Wind. Well, you know what? You want to put it in context, that's fine. You want to start before the film and say this is made in this year and this is why it's problematic and blah, blah. But then, you know, you don't not show Gone with the Wind. It's one of the most significant movies ever made. I mean, same thing with Birth of a Nation. Yeah, of course it's offensive. It's about the Klan. But, you know, D.W. Griffith is a huge part of the history of the cinema. And I mean, I think you can look at a lot of the films we love from the 80s and, you know, there's going to be a ton of stuff that you find potentially, you know, offensive.
Revenge of the Nerds has a rape scene in it.
I mean, Porky's has him spying on the girls in the shower.
Right, absolutely.
Time is hysterical, right? Now it's like, God, I mean, these guys should be locked up for, you know, I mean, but, you know, it's just, it tells you a lot about the time, which is made. They're historical documents, you know, in a way, to quote Galaxy Quest. But that's, you know, there's something to be said for that. You don't want to clean that up. You don't want to, you know, try and, you know, paper over the past. But that's what I'm saying. It's like, I remember when we showed Free Enterprise at the Peachtree, it was in Dallas, at a big film festival in Dallas. And there's a line where Mia Farrow, raped by the devil in Rosemary's Baby, she deserved it after what she put Woody through. And started screaming, you know, and fled the theater. And she was really, really pissed. And, you know, I remember somebody asked us about that later. It's like, well, you know, I really hate Mia Farrow after what she put Woody through. And, you know, got a big laugh. And, you know, it's like now you probably have half the theater would walk out during that line. And or really deeply, you know, offended because you're trivializing rape and, you know, all this stuff. And it's just like, I don't know what to say. I really feel like, you know, again, it's like, it's how do you live your life and how do you treat people and how do you, you know, it's just, you know, you can't, I don't know. It just makes me nuts. It makes
I
me
agree
nuts.
with the hate though. I mean, it's just people getting off on just being assholes. It's not critiquing. So for example, right before you came on, Chad and I were shitting on Rise of Skywalker.
Right.
But we were shitting on it of this does not move the plot.
Sure.
This does not, for example, you killed Chewbacca, supposedly, and then 2 scenes later he reappears. You have done nothing. You have not moved the plot whatsoever.
Well, and it's a no-win thing half the time because you could say, this is why I don't like this, you know, whether it's a new Star Trek or a new Star Wars or new whatever, and then you could delineate, you know, a bunch of reasons, very, you know, astute critiques, and they say, oh, you're just a gatekeeper. You're just, you just like the old stuff. And you're like, no, I just told you why this doesn't work dramatically. And it's like, no, you just want to hate it to hate on it. And it's like, how do you win that argument? You know?
A great example of this is the Ghostbusters remake a few years ago. There is no way, and the three of us talked about this. 10 minutes after seeing it, I realized I cannot critique this movie, even though I have a legitimate critique. Right. I cannot, because I come off as a sexist white asshole, no matter what I do. So it's better for me just to be quiet and go, meh.
Yeah, funny. I never saw the movie. I didn't have a problem, you know, with the idea of that film, you know, the gender reversal because
neither did I.
Get sorry, you know. So it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to make a film with Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis had passed away already. So I understand the intent. I never saw it, so I can't say whether it was bad or good. And I understand, you know, the backlash to criticism sometimes because, you know, with the Star Wars fans where it's like, oh, just Rey, you're just trying to make it a woman. It's like, that's a ridiculous criticism.
Right.
Agreed.
But then you can legitimately say, I don't like this movie because of this. And it doesn't mean that you're being sexist. It doesn't mean you're being racist or misogynistic. It just means you don't like the movie. There's still reasons not to like the movie. So
no, it's a different type of thing. I didn't mean to this was, by the way, nowhere in my notes of shit to ask you. But as we're having a conversation, it just dropped in my mind. How do you feel Free Enterprise will be, especially with the generation 20 years from now? And thank you for that really, really thoughtful answer. I appreciate it.
It's a snapshot of a certain era in time and a certain era of fandom. And you know, even the scene where Mark's with the German model, you he says, well, I think after what your people did to mine, I think a little breast fondling and a little action is, it wouldn't be out of the question.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure there people will be immensely offended by it. And you know what I say? I'm too bad. It's because comedy, comedy at least should be the last domain of the,
Should.
It should, but it's just getting ridiculous. I mean, on Twitter the other day, there was this huge outcry apparently over the fact that Richard Dawson used to kiss women on Family Feud.
Right.
A lot.
Late 70s. Yeah, a lot, right? And it was something we all grew up, at least of a certain age, we grew up with, and,
on the lips.
Thought twice about it.
Yeah.
Well, apparently people were outraged, and then, and Richard Dawson's been dead for 10 years. And so, people were outraged by this, and it's like, I don't know if they were trying to get the repeats canceled or whatever, but then it comes out that, as a matter of fact, all the women on Family Feud had to sign a waiver saying whether or not they wanted Richard Dawson to kiss them. And apparently 99.9% of the women did. And the ones that didn't, he didn't kiss. So it's such a non-story. In fact, they did everything right, and you also think about a lot of people because, it's the mid to late 70s, and he didn't care if you were white, black, Latino. I mean, and this in the 70s was, so the fact that Richard Dawson, that people were seeing Richard Dawson, kiss black women in an era where, it was all, even in James Bond, they were cutting out the love scene between Rosie Carver and Bond in South Africa. So this is a good thing. And it's like, they're saying, oh, this is horrible. How could this have happened? It's like, shut up. There are real problems in this country now, really big problems in this country right now. Why don't you focus on that instead of Richard Dawson and Family Feud from 1976?
Well, we're only supposed to hold you 45 minutes. We apologize. We went a few minutes past that. Is there anything you'd like to talk about? Any projects you got coming out? The Bond book, maybe a couple other things?
Absolutely. Check it out. And of course, I'm very proud of our series Pandora on the CW, and the new season, will be coming soon. And in fact, you can watch last season on the CW app, and the second season is going to be awesome. We learned a lot making the first season, and we don't have a ton of money to make that show. So, having more prep time now with this little intermission, this gentleman's intermission, it's good. But I'm really proud of that show, and the Bond book is, I just think, is fantastic. And of course, our podcast, Inglorious Trexperts and the 430 movie.
Mm-hmm.
Not only do we have the audio podcast, but the video podcasts are available now if you download the Electric Now app. And Inglorious Trexperts was something that I committed to a year and a half ago as a lark. Didn't expect to do it very long, and we've had so much fun doing that show that we just keep doing it. I mean, I keep trying to get out, but they keep pulling me back in, and it is what it is.
Right.
And hey, we're 130 some episodes, and we're nobody, so we totally know what you're talking about, right? You get caught up in it, and it's a lot of fun.
Well,
go ahead.
Together too, and hang out with people that you want to meet, and for us, it's the same thing. It's a chance for me to see a lot of people that I don't get to see as much as I'd like. And when we get into the studio and we're recording a episode, we've had some episodes that I'm extremely proud of, and we were very lucky to particularly with Star Trek, built up a huge audience very quickly, and they're so loyal, and people jump on Saturday mornings to download it, and it's like, I just can't imagine disappointing them by saying, okay, I'm leaving. So I mean, we'll keep doing it for the foreseeable future, and then 430 movie is just a hoot. But the thing I'm most proud of is, I brought in these guys, Steven Scarlatta and Josh Miller, to do a spinoff called Best Movies Never Made, where they interview filmmakers about the projects never made. And Steve Scarlatta was a PA for me on a TV show, and then he went off and did Jodorowsky's Dune. It's such a great documentary. And then Josh Miller,
right over here on the shelf. Yeah, it's great.
And so those guys, I mean, it's funny. I sat with them when they recorded their first show, and it was very stiff. And I'm like, did I make a mistake? I gave them a couple of notes, and then from then on out, they just killed it. I just love that show, and I think they've done an amazing job. They built up a really good audience, and I'm very proud of them.
Yeah, we were talking about it actually right before you got on. We were shitting on Rise of Skywalker, and I was talking to Chad about it. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. It's been a blast. James,
Thank you I said thank you for the entertainment. And I said, I think Free Enterprise was the first time I saw something where I'm like, oh, this is a fandom that I feel like I'm a part of. So thank you for that. Thank you. I actually saw House of Dead on the opening weekend. So thank you for entertaining me, giving me distractions, all of that. I appreciate it.
Look, thanks for having me on the show, guys. This is a lot of fun, and good luck with the podcast. And maybe when the new season premieres, come back and harass.
Love to have you back.
Oh, we'd love to have you back.
We're just try to be of that 45 that you gave us, so we're respectful of it. We have a ton of more.
Sorry.
Hey, that's all right. Well, I'll stop recording now. Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, good to talk to you guys. Take care.
Uh-huh.